I'm Mickey Pellerano, and this is Time Lord TV, the show where we talk about astrology, occultism, and how they interface with art and culture. Our guest today is Freemason Angel Millar, whose paintings I discovered while doing research one day at the Masonic Library here in New York City. I was so struck by their iconography that I looked him up and discovered he was also a brilliant scholar and an accomplished martial artist. Angel's latest book, The 3 Stages of Initiatic Spirituality, Craftsman, Warrior, Magician, traces the mythological contours of our relationship to spiritual evolution and physical mastery, as detailed in the grade systems of secret societies, but also the unfolding of our ordinary life events. Our musical guest today is Maya, experimental electronic musician, whose latest album, Kina, is a collaboration with Turkish musician Tolga Baklajula. We'll be screening one of her videos today off that record, directed by Sebastian Mlynarski. We'll be starting off the show today with our astrological forecast as usual. So, thanks for watching. Or if you're listening to our podcast edition, thanks for listening. And if you'd like to support the show, please visit patreon.com/TimeLordTV. Stick around. December 29th, 2020, full moon in Cancer. The last full moon of 2020 sees Luna in her domicile, the sign over which she has rulership, and therefore is at the height of her potency. For the first time in 3 years, the Cancer full moon shines free from the forbidding opposition from Saturn. The sun sheds light upon Luna from his position in Capricorn, where we see him growing in strength, like a child pharaoh or an infant god as his dominion over the daylight hours increases. This is why Luna has rulership over Cancer, where she comes to her fullest expression in relation to the sun as the form of the Great Mother, flowing with nutrients, protection, emotional fortification required to sustain the maturation of the soul. After this conjugal union with the sun, the moon will apply to Mercury, who has just made his heliacal rising. This means that the planet Mercury has for weeks been entirely invisible in the night sky, always outshined by the flash of the rising and setting sun. Mercury is just speeding far enough ahead of the sun that he will be visible for a few moments in the western horizon just after sunset. The messages conveyed by Mercury will likely indicate some area of our life where we must exercise maturity and growth. His heliacal rise may compel us to put this out in writing or wax eloquent with our resolutions. Results should be fortuitous with Luna's effulgence from Cancer. Rewards of great comfort, intimacy, pleasure, and creativity will be fruitful, particularly if we ourselves extend generosity and nurturing to others in need. There's the hint of a square from Mars and Aries to this full moon also, so promises towards embodying warrior energy through athletics or martial arts would do nicely to quell the red planet's tempestuous nature. January 6th, Mars enters Taurus. On January 6th, Mars will make his ingress into Taurus, where the planet of strength, will, energy, and heat finds its detriment. Taurus is a provincial sign of slow and stable cultivation, sensual pleasure, patience, comfort, health, and simplicity. This is where Venus rules over the sunny and wholesome unveilings of nature. The war planet is much more at home in the opposing polarity of Scorpio, where he can express his carnal and existential cravings from its shadowy depths. In Taurus, he is likelier to find himself chopping wood than crushing skulls, and we should expect to fare better if our attitudes follow suit. Venus will guide him toward taming his strength when she cooperates the very next day in a trine aspect, making her entrance into Capricorn. This makes for a pastoral love scene between the martial and Venusian polarities that may rouse the physical passions. It may also guide us to approach our health in ways that aim to cherish the body rather than punish it, to enrich our dietary customs, or to explore our sexual nature with innocence and wonder at its power. January 11th, Mars square with Saturn, Jupiter, and Mercury. Shortly thereafter, however, in the second week of January, Mars will find himself in inferior square to Saturn once again. Saturn in the first decan of Aquarius is the Five of Swords, where we reject our foundations and mental constructs to prepare for inventions stemming forth from our unique path, to succeed where others before us have failed. This will be the force that beats the swords of Mars into plowshares, urging him to find creative outlets for his destructive energies. How must we train the warrior within, or channel the powers of eroticism with refinement? As stated in the 3 stages of initiatic spirituality, this is where Jason must tame the fire-breathing bulls into subservient oxen. We must master the martial energies of wrath and desire with precision and focus if we are to optimize the potential set forth by these astrological events. The square of Jupiter and Mercury in Aquarius will come in rapid succession for Mars, urging him toward intelligence and expansion. Finding spiritual depth in the demands of the body, or channeling them towards magic, a force that is palpable whenever Mercury, the magician, and Jupiter, the high priest, combine their potencies in the heavens. January 12th, new moon in Capricorn. Nourished by the nectar of the full moon in Cancer 2 weeks prior, we can use this new moon to commit to the strong physical connotations in this month's constellations. But with this lunation conjoined with Pluto, we might expect them to entail some manner of trial. Pluto is the planet of immense concealed power, and therefore governs the realms that require some style of initiation. Secret societies, covert operations, organized crime, the clergy, aristocracy, celebrity, etc. We must prove our worth before any boons can be bestowed upon us, and the wages of Pluto can range from the nefarious to the esoteric to the glamorous. The recent appearance of Venus in Capricorn may fortuitously tip the scales toward the latter, like Persephone's union with Hades or Venus adored of Hephaestus. If we do not fear the intimidations of Pluto and dare to cross his threshold or slip beneath his velvet robe, the ambitions set forth on this new moon could dramatically expand our reaches. The new moon in Capricorn mid-month is on the Four of Discs, which, in Aleister Crowley's Thoth deck, bears the name often associated with Pluto, power. With a new moon on Pluto, we can pledge ourselves to develop those abilities which remain yet untapped, or vow to enter the exclusive or forbidding realms that promise treasures for us. January 20th, Mars conjoins Uranus, diurnal versus nocturnal square. When Mars approaches Uranus, we must tread with caution, particularly if we have a problematic Mars in our natal chart, or it happens to be reigning as Time Lord, or, as is the case with your humble narrator, both. Uranus was discovered in the midst of the French and American revolutions, and has since earned the status of marking upheaval, disruption, and rebellion. It also stands for Promethean innovation, major subcultural trends, or general eccentricity. Uranus, Mars, and Luna are in strong square with the Aquarius stellium of Saturn, Mercury, and Jupiter, with the Sun, lord of the diurnal planets, having just joined their ranks, making ingress into Aquarius that day. The trifecta of planets that rule over the daylight hours will have the upper hand in this square. The sovereignty of the Sun, severity of Saturn, magnanimity of Jupiter, combined with the cleverness of Mercury, will all be infused with the Aquarian quest of ushering in the new. The diurnal planets can be said to correspond with the aspects of our lives that are public or societal. Meanwhile, the nocturnal sect, ruling over the interior and more private strata, presides in Taurus. The waxing moon in her sign of exaltation, alongside Mars, applying to a trine with Venus, our primal instincts, pleasures, comforts, aggressions, and Uranian drive for experimentation will blaze brightly under the auspices of their lunar monarch. This signifies conflict between the natural impulses and the social identity, but the former will be challenged to fall in line with the image we project outward to the world, called to task by Saturn in his position of rulership. Perhaps this can serve as an evaluation of integrity. Rather than merely demand that our exterior society restructure in our favor, our interior life must coalesce with the ideas we espouse. If we cherish justice, we must act justly in our private dealings. If we loathe oppression, we must never bring down our brethren. If we seek support from those in positions of power, we must first exercise charity to those who are less privileged. Our body and its neurological makeup can be just as resistant to change, Taurus, as the entrenched systems we observe in the environment. But if we seek the alchemical water, the Promethean substance of Aquarius, we must heed the call of the heroic drama of departure and return.
Well, your whole record is amazing, really. It's so good.
Thank you.
But the video, I mean, what's this costume that you're wearing?
Yeah, so I got inspired by, I saw images of these weddings that take place in Bulgaria, and they're like Muslim weddings. And I believe it was a custom that was actually banned, and now recently has kind of become a trend again in Bulgaria. And a lot of the time they're using kind of Christmas decorations in their hair, and then their faces are painted really corpse-like, and the men look very regular and the women just look crazy. So I kind of had an inspiration from that. And then also they have the veil, which has all the money put on it, and I just kind of liked the idea of screwing up like American dollars and kind of having that as a focal point.
Why did they ban this practice?
I think it was a way of kind of taking away Muslim culture, like out of like almost like a kind of racist thing.
So the song is called Home, right?
Yeah.
What's the theme?
Yeah, so I'm from England, and I've been living in New York for actually probably longer than I lived in England. And I was just thinking about identity and how I have 2 passports and borders, and there was a lot of stuff in the news with borders, and just what is your identity? Like, I don't feel American. I do feel English, but I've lost a lot of English isms, a lot of English slang, stuff like that. And yeah, so it was about that. And in the video, this character is kind of wandering around with a suitcase looking for a home and seeing if anyone will take any notice. And I think LA is just LA. They're used to seeing weird things. No one really gives a second look. And I was wandering around with Sebastian, who shot the video. It was just us 2, and he had like a steady cam. And yeah, and a lot of the time I was like, well, no one's like even gives a shit, So yeah.
So it's kind of like a stranger in a strange land motif kind of thing.
Yeah. And and just that play on identity.
So on that note, this record is a collaboration between you and a musician who's based in Turkey.
Yeah, he lives in Eskişehir. He doesn't even live in Istanbul, and he contacted me on Facebook. I've made a bunch of other videos with different collaborators, and he'd seen some videos and was like, I like your music. And then he's like, I run this label called Vent, and he sent me some of his music. He's like, would you be interested in collaborating? And so for the next year, we sent sound files back and forth, and he has a pretty hard sound, and I tend to have a more ethereal sound. And so we kind of mushed the 2 together, and it came out on double album vinyl. So.
And this is Tolga Baklajul, right?
Yes, good pronunciation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the whole thing was remote, and you're kind of having this like overseas exchange this whole time. What was that experience like? Was it frustrating? Was it fun? Did it feel exotic, or how did it work?
Yeah, it was interesting because I'd never met him, and I'd never even spoken to him. So I never heard his voice. We would just communicate by text. And I mean, we had this kind of relationship for like a year and a half. And then I was going to England, and he happened to be in Paris. And I was like, I'm going to come meet you because this is just so weird. Like, we've been communicating. And so I actually did finally meet him, but it was after the record was already finished. And and then this year we did a remix EP also of that album. And so, we may do stuff in the future. I'm not sure, but I would like to be in the same room. So yeah, we'll see.
And what was the remix album? Who collaborated on that project?
Silent Servant, Marshall Cantoral, Decimus, and Mukata, who's from Palestine.
Wow. And all of these are releases on Tolga's label, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting that he runs this pretty obscure, mostly techno label from this small town in Turkey, and he has distribution in America and in Europe, but yeah, and he's a aeronautical engineer, which also makes him super interesting.
So give us the name of the record and also the name of the remix album so that people can give it a listen and we can check it out.
So the album is called Kina, and Kina is kind of like how you have in Hindu culture, you have mandi on your hands, the henna. In Turkey, it's called Kina. There's a song on the album which is about the whole ritual of that ceremony of having the Kina and right before you get married. And the remix album is just called Kina Remixes. Yeah.
Nice. And it's by Maya, just your name, and Tolga Baglajul.
Yes.
Well, both records are amazing. I can attest to that. Beautiful work. So good. And thanks so much for being on the show. This has been awesome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we're here with Angel Millar, author of this book, The 3 Stages of Initiatic Spirituality. Craftsman, warrior, magician. I love this book. Seriously, I tore through it in, I think it took me less than a day. I just like went right through it. It's fantastic. How do we define initiation? Is it something that is exclusive to, say, a magical order or a secret society of some kind, or is it just sort of part of the human condition in some way?
Right. Well, I would say that it is part of the human condition. I mean, if you look back over the history of humanity, typically tribal and ancient societies, and even after that, often have some kind of initiation from moving from childhood into adulthood. And obviously today we are more aware of it in the context of modern esotericism or modern occultism. But yes, I would say it is to some degree an aspect of life that the initiation, the formal initiation, the ritual initiation makes us conscious of. But it might be possible to be, at least to have some kind of initiatic experience without that. But certainly that makes us aware of the changes and aware of this idea of initiation.
Yes. It reminds me of kind of an idea that Joseph Campbell put forth one day about how the female body spontaneously and naturally heralds its own initiation into adulthood with menstruation. Yeah. But with the male body, in tribal societies especially, since it was not a naturally occurring function that paralleled that, they felt that some sort of ritual was needed to declare that shift.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and obviously with the woman's body and menstruation, she becomes linked to the cycle of the moon, but also to the other women of the tribe. So they have this sort of mystical experience in common and an experience in relation to time and periods of time, whereas men do not have that, of course. And of course, women are naturally, in a sense, linked to the moon. And although in some cultures men are linked to the moon and in others they're linked to the sun, I think in a general sense you could say that the idea for the man is to link himself to the sun and to have a kind of solar body. And the transformation for men can come about in different ways. But if we look at the tribe of the Maasai in Africa, they have this very, really quite brutal initiation rite of circumcision, passing from childhood into adulthood. And the circumcision is done without anesthetic, so it's very painful. And there are other ritual elements such as whitening the face and wearing certain ritual clothing before becoming a warrior. But another aspect of the male initiation is the forging of the body in some way as a warrior, moving from the stage of the craftsman as a child into the warrior ideal, of forging this body as a stronger body and a more muscular body. And when you think about it, you have, say, for example, the Shaolin monks associated with Buddhism, but also with the martial arts. And I think what we forget today, the sort of militaristic training of the Shaolin temple and of other martial arts, although all the monks would be wearing the same robes and in that sense would have a uniform, through the training they're also making their bodies uniform in the same way that the female body is uniform.
So it's the strengthening of the body, the initiation of the warrior comes with, obviously it must be post-pubescent, right? Because the prepubescent male body doesn't really have the athletic capability
Right.
to get there.
Right.
So it is, almost accessing that hormonal aspect of nature and kind of optimizing it in some through training.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and not to go off too much of a tangent, but if you, in my experience at least of inner alchemy, or what people would associate with chakras and inner energy and chi and prana, it seems to be strongest either when you're sort of post-pubescent, sort of early to late teens, or when your body is physically stronger, because you're already making that alchemical change in the body. So, and one of the effects of working out and being more muscular is that the testosterone is raised straight away. So
it's almost as though the male body requires some kind of intervention, right?
Yes,
Or some kind of like willful optimization of training the body, making it strong in the sense that it can, well, first of all, cultivate the powers that are inherent to it, right? But then second of all, protect the self, protect the community, protect the family, right? So combat is a big central theme of the warrior, right?
I mean, I don't know if it's essential for everyone to engage in martial arts and physical fighting and this kind of thing. This could be obviously metaphoric, and we hear about the war in heaven in Christianity and St. Michael casting out Satan from heaven and his angels from heaven. And in Islam, of course, you have this notion of jihad or struggle, and you have the lesser jihad, which is a physical struggle of fighting with your enemy. And of course, there are all kinds of rules governing this, and it's supposed to be a defensive struggle, but nevertheless, it is a physical or an actual battle or war with your enemy. It's not metaphoric, but then you have the greater jihad or the greater struggle. And this is the struggle with oneself to be a better Muslim or a better person as well. And so you find this motif of struggle and battle in different religions, in Hinduism as well. I've been involved in the martial arts for quite a long time, and I'm not someone who is prone to violence or who enjoys violence or likes hurting people. But for me, certainly, it's been an initiatic experience, probably largely because of that fact. And, it's a unique experience and a very eye-opening experience when you push yourself physically beyond what you think your limitations are. And I think that martial arts, when you're put into those situations which are extremely uncomfortable or can be extremely uncomfortable, you're sort of thrust back into that world where you have to suddenly are forced to be attuned to this psychic ability to be aware of what's around you and be aware of danger and what the other person might be thinking.
This is what I love about your book so much, how it has this linear narrative, right, between the three stages, and how it's like, well, actually very natural for the warrior condition to precede that of the magician, right? Because the mind is honed, the physical powers and humors of the body are made known to the mind before they can be kind of directed in this magical way. And as you put it very well in your book, how the warrior caste is about creating, maintaining order amid chaos.
Yeah, that's right.
And this is a condition of the fixed signs, right? To maintain. Scorpio, we have the dragon or the serpent. The serpent is a symbol of Scorpio. So it's the dragon slaying hero, right? And Aquarius, we have the hero that retreats into solitude to obtain the substance in return, the water bearer. You would definitely equate the warrior with the hero phase of the mythology cycle.
That's right. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. And then so the craftsman, if it relates to creation myths, can you elaborate a little bit on the idea of the craftsman, right? Because it really precedes the whole cycle, right?
Perhaps I should say that although these are regarded as stages, they are overlapping, and the ultimate idea is to embody them all as one. But certainly one of the aspects of the craftsman stage is viewing some kind of craft or practice or art as a way of reaching some kind of spiritual awakening or enlightenment or transcendence. And you see this in different ways, of course. And in the West, for example, probably the best examples would be Freemasonry, where the craft of Freemasonry uses the tools of the stonemasons or the tools of geometry and architecture to convey certain ideas, certain symbols of creation and of existence and of deity or God or whatever is beyond the material world. And through reflecting on these stonemasons and architectural tools, one can come to an understanding of creation and God and one's own self and one's place in the world. And that itself is, in a roundabout way, a very ancient idea. So if you look at the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, Plato talks about the creator being a craftsman and creating the world through these 5 elements: earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. And in Japan as well, for example, you have although very different, you still have this notion of a craft being a way of transcending. So perhaps through the art of painting, or sumi, you, with your breath, you're painting and entering into a certain state of mind where you can transcend the everyday concerns and glimpse some kind of awakening or glimpse some kind of enlightenment. And of course, all of the arts and even the most everyday activities can thus become a way of reaching enlightenment. You know, years ago, I used to go and stay in a Benedictine monastery. And Benedictines is a type of Christian monk, or Christian monasticism. They wear black robes. And they're mostly actually known for the work. They would normally grow vegetables or teach in a school and this kind of thing. Whereas Trappists are mostly known for making beer or cheese or something like that. And some of the things they said to me, they were very radical from a Christian perspective, really. And my main friend there, Father Thomas, once said to me that life is the great miracle. And we might think that, but for a Christian, that's quite radical, because for the Christian, the great miracle is supposed to be turning water into wine. But as he said, life is a great miracle. The ordinary is miraculous. And whether you're a Benedictine monk or a Buddhist who's trying to reach their own Buddha nature, or a spiritual person, quote unquote, I think to a very large degree, the idea is to recognize that the world we're in is a spiritual world and has spiritual connotations, and we can have spiritual experiences there. As the Buddhists say, samsara is nirvana. So.
For sure. And that's regardless of station and regardless of command. I think a lot of times in our hierarchical society, we think, okay, well, I have to be, if I'm not the director, do you know what I mean? Or like the auteur of this thing, then I'm certainly not playing a divine role. Right. Freemasonry has this amazing symbolism, which of course you're much more well versed in than I, but obviously the divine is noted as the grand architect or the great architect of the universe, and yet the builder and the craftsman and everybody else is included in that as well, right? And
right. Absolutely, yeah.
And this is why in Masonry, right, they wear gloves so that the social class is not apparent, right? The brotherhood transcends that.
Yeah, and in some French lodges, they used to, all of the members would wear a sword, which denoted that every member of the lodge was noble, but not necessarily as the outside world would recognize. They might not be a sir or a knight in the outside world, but inside the lodge, even if they were a fairly poor individual doing some ordinary job, they were regarded as a noble person. And of course, this is more to do with one's character than one's station in the world or how much money they have. But yeah.
Well, if the initiatory cycle is inherent to life, and we're all sort of experiencing it, right?
If we're conscious of it, yeah.
Right. the lodge is a place where that is recognized.
Right. So we might say the lodge is where people go to become conscious of the initiation that is inherent in life in a certain respect.
Right. So it provides these rituals that are missing kind of from contemporary culture, right? That we find in ancient cultures. Freemasonry kind of delivers that.
Right, I would say, yeah. Well, in a sense, because it does use these very ordinary, and some people might even think rather trivial tools, building, architecture, because it does say, look, these have some kind of symbolic value or some kind of metaphysical value. By implication, it would seem to suggest that everything has a kind of meaning or symbolic value. And you could think about that in regards to the tarot as well, right? So that these are basically ordinary scenes, but people can read into them states of consciousness, or can see archetypal patterns of being in them as well. But really, they're just ordinary pictures.
This, you put it really eloquently in the book, how in the stage of the hero, this sort of duality exists, right, between the male and female aspects of the psyche, right, the conscious and subconscious, if you like. And then in the magician stage, that's where they become merged, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what does that look like? Like how could you sort of like give a narrative of that transition from when one moves from warrior to magician?
We could say sort of metaphorically that the craftsman stage is the stage of the development of a society. It develops a culture, but then something goes wrong. It somehow exits from the golden age. It's created this culture. You can think of the myth of Atlantis, for example. But it exits from the golden age when everything is in harmony and man is in harmony with nature and God and so on. And now there's some kind of conflict, maybe with another peoples, or there's disease or whatever it may be, or moral decline, and the warrior appears on the horizon to reestablish order in some way. And of course, this itself brings a new kind of problem. It brings stagnation, that we cannot keep repeating things forever and ever. And this is the problem with, let's say, conservatism, that it wants to conserve what is, and what is may be very beautiful. And here we are in this beautiful place, but we can't keep replicating the past as if we're reproducing tacky museum artifacts. We do have to kind of go beyond, and the magician enters the scene to sort of break these taboos against what we cannot do, and the magician has typically always been a breaker of taboos. Odin, for example, is accused in one of the myths of being, or one of the sagas, of being womanly, because he practices a female form of magic. And this is a very taboo thing to do. Even though he's a god, he's still accused of being womanly. And if we look back at ancient shamans or to tribal shamans, certainly the male shaman, sometimes dressed as a skeleton or as a bird, but very often the male shaman dressed as a woman. And then the shaman doesn't have a gender like everything else. Everything else is either male or female, but he is both, or it is both male and female. So in a sense, he's transgressed against nature and certainly against society. But at the same time, this transgression has made him more like a god, because he is the whole of nature in one. He's almost independent from nature. And in this sense, he has raised himself up beyond the level of ordinary people. So that he is somewhere between the people and the gods. And this gives him the power to communicate with spirits and to banish them, or to remove them from a sick person where the spirit is causing the sickness, and so on. So yeah, there's this taboo that is associated with magic, and is associated today, and has always been associated with magic. But today, certainly, as our societies have gone through these different permutations, yes, we're very much in the world of magic, and one can see this very much in the control that we give over to governments or to businesses, quite large corporations. I mean, because of their use of language and the amount of money that is spent on marketing, for example, language really informs how we think about ourselves. And of course, our society is always changing with these new ideas, and we don't really know where we're going, but we always go along with it because it's so convincing. It is a realm of magic, in a sense, of casting a spell over society.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, this whole thing, it's if the stage of the magician is the final stage, or at least in this particular cycle, right, of craftsman, warrior, magician, now we're dealing with the mutable signs of astrology, right? 4 signs either ruled by Mercury or Jupiter. That's it. They're either ruled by the magician or the high priest, you might say, right? And Mercury is androgynous. Magic and language are inherently androgynous in a mythological or astrological sense, right? So this magician stage, right, encompassed by both the high priest, such as Jupiter, and the magician, such as Mercury, where, Jupiter's a benefic planet. We look at the high priest as somebody who's going to, sort of like bring blessings or enlightenment in some way. Mercury, on the other hand, is morally neutral. He's neither benefic or malefic. So we see with the stage of the magician how there's all this potential for it to be like actually pretty dark, right?
Yeah, very dark indeed. Yeah. Yeah, and of course, people may not agree with these classifications, but nevertheless, there's always been this idea of the black magician and the white magician, or of the malevolent magic and benefic magic, or higher magic and lower magic. And certainly we could be in a world of, let's say, very dark magic, which is more about manipulation. And I think, we can see this with ideas of people who want to get rid of their physical body altogether and upload their consciousness, and they think that it will somehow still be them, but they'll be existing in some technological realm where they exist as a data or digital information, but somehow it will be them but more free. When actually, of course, our natures are very much, we're entirely linked to our bodies and to our own sense of mortality as well. And that's why in the warrior stage in particular, and in warrior traditions, and not just that, in probably every religious tradition and most spiritual traditions, possibly every initiatic tradition, there is this making the initiate aware of his own mortality. And of course, you can walk into a church and see Jesus crucified on a cross, not baby Jesus, notably. And in Freemasonry as well, you have this symbolism of death. So in many lodges, and increasingly today, actually, there's a chamber of reflection where the candidate who's not yet a member would go and sit in a darkened room with an image of a skull and the crossbones and a sand timer, and would reflect on his own mortality. And
all of this signifies transcendence through trial, right? Transcendence through first having to face the morbid, or having to face the fearful, or the darkness of some kind. Yeah. Whereas kind of the illusion, woven by contemporary society, we hear in Eastern traditions, we're told that all is one, right? That everything is connected, Yeah. And, systems such as Kabbalah, for example, illustrate how everything is connected, right? And, magic is about tapestry weaving those correspondences together. Yeah. And institutions or entities such as social media create this feeling of being hyper-connected or ubiquitously connected to all, but it does not require any kind of trial. It doesn't require any kind of sacrifice of any kind. Yeah. And therefore, it's a very ersatz form of connection that is not connected to the body. Yeah. And what's so great about the book is it's really, your book is what that draws us into like this physical vehicle. Like this is our link to the cosmic, you know? It's even the use of the word avatar is so profane, you know, this word that was used to describe, you know, an embodiment of a deity.
Yeah, that's right.
Such as like Rama or Jesus or anybody. And now it's like, oh, this is my avatar, sort of some like cartoon character that I'm throwing onto this plane, and it is black magic because it's giving people a false sense of connectivity, and it's giving people a false sense of really what the Buddhist would earn through very intense training and very rigorous, right? It's like they haven't. We're almost given a taste of this paradise of connectivity, but it is not one that is preceded by the initiatic structure that's illustrated in your book, right? Of first coming into the self physically and one's skill and understanding that one is godlike through one's ability to create. And then secondly, understanding, you know, one's ability to harness literally the energies of the body, right? The physical, sexual, everything, and optimize these. And in the natural course, once these have been accomplished, and you know, both cycles, as you explain quite often, interweave, and then we're able to transcend it. Then we're able to sort of manipulate it, but through. I like how you term black magic is really manipulation based. Right? It's based on kind of creating a physical outcome, whereas white magic might be perceived as magic that is designed at kind of a union with our concept of divinity, right?
Yeah, of the higher self, absolutely. Yeah, and unfortunately, although I would say that we are living in a time of magic, or where the magician archetype dominates in very unhealthy ways, you know, the spell that it's putting over us, or one of the spells that it's putting over society, is the idea that you do not have to face danger. You don't have to go outside of your comfort zone. You don't even really need to learn any kind of art that you can somehow create through very convenient means, some kind of self-expression. Or if, let's say, if you want to be a painter, I don't know how many people still want to be fine art painters, but there's the idea that, well, if you just express yourself, and you don't need to learn the skills to express yourself, because that might take away from it. So you just do whatever you feel, and we've never seen that in any time before. The idea that you don't need to learn the basic skills, you just somehow try to express yourself. Though clearly, if you don't know the basic skills, you can't express yourself. And again, with safety, there's this big push towards safety, and we must not allow you to put yourself in any kind of danger or to take risks. But life is inherently dangerous, and it requires taking risks, and to be able to ascend or transcend who we are now requires that. And related to that, we have this idea that you should just be yourself. You know, you should just be you. And I understand that some people may have lived very repressed, or grown up in very repressive households or whatever, where being themselves is a kind of radical notion for them. I don't think it's quite as common as we're led to believe. But I don't want to be myself. Tomorrow I want to be a bit better at the things that interest me than I am today, and I hope I'm a bit better than I was yesterday. So I just want to keep transcending myself. I don't want to be myself. I want to transcend it.
Right.
And the point is to reach that point where we can get to the Buddha nature in whatever we're doing, whether it's art or martial arts or so on. And so the spell that's put over us is one that, in a sense, that it takes away the initiatic experience and doesn't allow people any kind of entrance into it. Like you shouldn't take a risk. You shouldn't do anything that's dangerous. You do martial arts, you might get a bruise or something. That's dangerous. You want to wrap yourself in cotton wool. When you stand in that dojo or that martial arts temple and you face that guy who's been doing martial arts 10 years more than you, you're going to get hurt. There's no way you can wrap yourself in cotton wool at that point. You're going to come home with bruises, maybe hurt, maybe worse than bruised. You still have to face it, and then you'll experience some things you'll never experience otherwise, and you'll know who you are. That's initiatic.
Yeah.
That's initiation. It's not cozy.
Yeah. And censorship also, right? How everything needs to be kind of like banned, right? Everything, society needs to be protected from images from the cultural canon that might now possibly offend somebody or you know, might not possibly be, might make somebody feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's right.
It's that's not healthy, right? You can't have a society with no exposure to darkness.
Yeah.
You know, you can't have a society with no exposure to death or hate or violence or any of these things, because those things are real.
They are real. Yeah.
You know, and astrology, you see it all the time. You know, these astrologers who are like, hey, everything's campy and this and that. I'm like, it's not fucking campy. Astrology is about death, and it's about rape, and it's about poverty, and it's about darkness, and it's dark. And this, if you know, if you're gonna get what it's meant to teach you, right, what the cosmic laws are meant to demonstrate to you, right, or what life really has to give to you, you do have to expose yourself to trouble. And you've got to expose yourself to discomfort and aggression and all these things, because they are real. You know, and a society that is not equipped to deal with this.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially, it almost seems designed to create a society that's going to be more susceptible to black magic.
Yeah,
right?
definitely, very much so. Yeah,
Yeah.
certainly, and certainly very susceptible to suggestion and emotional control and emotional blackmail. Absolutely, yeah. And you know, the thing is as well, when you face these situations which seem horrendous and may even seem, you know, overwhelming, what happens most of the time is you find some inner resources that enable you to triumph over them in some way or another. You find some intellectual or emotional resources that you didn't realize were there. So, you know, that's how you can transcend yourself and become strong and become, you know, an initiate in some regards.
What is the self, right? And what self do you want to be? I love this distinction you draw in the book. You know, you speak of Eckhart Tolle and Colin Wilson and their experience of like, well, there must be two selves.
Right, that's right. Yeah, it's very interesting because they had exactly the same revelation, but I don't know that Eckhart Tolle really knew about Colin Wilson.
Probably not,
No.
I'm guessing.
Yeah. But yeah, they had this revelation where there's two Colin Wilsons or two Eckhart Tolles, and so who are they? And clearly one is a very unhelpful version, the lower self, and the other one is the higher self that they can be if they can just push through this time of stress and time of maybe even terror in some regards, you know.
Well, first of all, other than the fact that I recommend this book to pretty much everybody, I mean, it's really lays things out so poetically and so beautifully, and it's inspiring. I mean, especially, you know, as someone who's on this path, right? It's inspiring to be like, oh man, I just want to get better at this. What concise kind of tools can you kind of offer for people who are looking for this initiatic experience and this degree of self-development and mastery?
Right. Well, you know, certainly I recommend being able to incorporate aspects of the craftsman, the warrior, and the magician, which could be in different levels of ability. But if we take, let's say, the most basic, you know, the craftsman learns some kind of art, preferably, from my perspective, some kind of classical art. Maybe it's painting, sculpture, or poetry. Get to a point where you have mastery of some kind of skill. Now, of course, in today's world, it could be other things as well. Maybe it's making custom motorbikes or something, or if nothing else, I always recommend people learn to cook. You know, there's a great point that the Hare Krishnas make, and they say you should only eat the food of other Krishna disciples, because people who are not disciples, or let's say not spiritual or not awakened in some sense, they put their personality into the food in the way a painter puts his personality into the art. And that can be your art. And again, that can lead you to the warrior, because you want to know about nutrition and what to eat and when to eat. And also you can avoid all the junk food and the additives that's in mass-produced food, quote unquote, that most people are eating today and getting sick with. Then take up some kind of martial art, some kind of physical or physically demanding skill, some kind of physical training, lifting weights. Martial art would be excellent. And if people really cannot practice a martial art, maybe they're old or they're physically infirm, take up something that's related to it, maybe yoga, maybe Pilates, which was invented by a boxer, maybe Qigong. I do Qigong as part of my training. Qigong is a sort of light, very light exercise that will keep you limber and healthy. It's practiced by Chinese people, especially older Chinese people, in fact. And for the magician, have some kind of a spiritual practice, meditation, maybe visualization, reading sacred texts, contemplating what they say, praying, and so on, and have some kind of connection to the divine. And one thing I like to do, and I don't do it every day certainly, but I like to have time where I work out physically, do some meditation, and then do what's called Lectio Divina, which is spiritual reading, where you would read a passage of a sacred text and reflect on it for, say, 10 minutes, and you will have all kinds of revelations and understanding come to you that you wouldn't normally otherwise. So I try to incorporate all three, if possible.
It's more than just self-potential, like what your book puts forth,
Yeah.
is really that through these practices, you will discover more than the self, right? You'll discover this kind of gateway to really the absolute.
Yeah, well, that's the irony, right? So people who say, "Oh, I just want to be myself," what they really mean is, I don't want to develop certain sides to myself. Maybe I just want to be an artist. I don't want to do physical training, or I want to do physical training. I don't want to do any kind of art or reading or anything like that. So I want to be less than I can be, is what people really mean when they say, "I just want to be myself." And if people really, develop these three different aspects of themselves, they'll discover that they're probably almost completely different to who they think they are. And then when they embody this higher state within their own life and their own consciousness, yeah, for sure, then embodying this higher self, then you're in contact with this divine nature in a way, that it's the soul, or Atman, as related to Brahman.
Totally. It's about practice, and it's about bringing it all together. So great and so inspiring.
And thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. It's been tremendous, and thank you for writing such an incredible book. I've already recommended it to so many people, and I can't wait for the next one.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
And thank you all for tuning in and being a part of this. This has been January 2021, and we'll see you next month. Merry Christmas, and we'll see you for Valentine's Day. Take care.